Welcome everybody, my name is Paul. I'm a country realtor in the western part of Virginia near Lexington. And my site here, I talk a lot about homesteading and rural property because that's my specialty. And I love living in the country. I've been to a lot of cosmopolitan cities, big cities, a lot of tourism and so on. But when it really comes down to it, you want to go home, you want to go to a nice, comfortable place where there's privacy and quiet and maybe some wildlife, some nature, and then, regroup. So I love country life, and I want to talk a little bit about people who come and look for a homestead because I'm very much into homesteading. My two sons are really into it, living on the land, and it's the ancient way of living. I've made some other videos about the homesteading type of life. It makes sense, especially in modern age, to live near where food is produced and produce some of your own food. I mean, lots of country estates in Virginia and all around the country, people have a job, they may be a teacher or something, but in addition they have some livestock, maybe some chickens, they produce some eggs, they have a nice vegetable garden and so on. So maybe they harvest their timber on their property and make use of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about really important things to know before you buy a homestead. And I help people a lot try to find a property. And not too long ago I met with a couple, lovely couple, and they were interested in buying a homestead, and up in another part of Virginia. I won't give details of the names or anything, but there was a piece of land, and it was outlined in that, as you can see there, in that spot. And there's a satellite photo of it. You can see here, it's kind of like in this neighborhood here, this piece of land here that goes down toward the road. But anyway, there was discussion on okay, you want to start a homestead and you've never done it before. It's the oldest way of living. It's very well supported in the state of Virginia. It's a long tradition in Virginia of living on the land and living with the land and having some livestock and a country farm or whatever. And there's also a tremendous amount of land in Virginia in active production. It's not necessarily, it may be a field or forest. There's timber operations, there might be fishing going on. The resources of the land traditionally are what really kept us alive and still do. If you drive around the country, you realize how many farms there are. I said, thank goodness for those farmers. They work really hard and they produce food for us so we can have all our other things in life. Now, I want to have to make a little list here. I'm a big fan of checklists because I have a background, and some part of my background is aviation. I have a small plane pilot license. There's when you buy a property, no matter what kind of property you're buying, have a strategy. I'm a licensed real estate agent in the state of Virginia for Lions Team Realty in Moneta, Virginia. And I work with customers and go out there and I ask them, know what you want, because if you don't know what you want, then the realtor's never going to know. So narrow it down to be as specific as possible. And there are certain parameters that always people have, that maybe it's the price, maybe it's the acreage, or maybe they want to have enough land to build another house someday on it, and that can happen if the zoning is right. So have a really clear idea about what you want and narrow it down, because there are thousands and thousands of properties out there for sale. So once you get your financial parameters in order, you start saying, okay, what's available in my desire list? And think about what's on the land. For example, if you have some saplings on this land that I was talking about, there's a lot of really small saplings, 3 to 5 inches in diameter. And boy, they make excellent fencing. You can harvest those down, cut them, trim out. They make excellent firewood, because that small sapling, you just lay them down to dry, and after a while, you just got endless firewood for your home. And in the small chunks, it's very easy. You can have a small wood stove, and you can have these little logs that you cut from the saplings, and meanwhile, you make a path through your property. I met a man one time who had about 43 acres, and he had done a masterful job. He was a financier and kind of semi-retired and everything, and he just slowly but surely, he saved all the really good trees. He let some of them grow really big and have a beautiful canopy. And then he also made some pathways, some wider pathways that you can go through with an ATV or maybe even a pickup truck without disturbing large portions of his land that he kept very natural, you see. So you can have a strategy about what you're going to buy and what you're going to do with it, and look for unused resources. Sometimes people have a house sitting on a property and they weren't into the homesteading thing. They have plenty of land and there's nice hardwood trees there and so on, nice sun and so on, but they weren't into it. So you come there and you say, look, these people have a fantastic piece of land. I'll buy the house, and from there I'll develop the homestead. You see, because there's an awful lot of people that do have great piece of land, but they never got into the chickens and all that stuff. So that's just a place that's just ripe. Okay, the house is already there. Now, another way you can go in it is you can get a piece of land that has, let's say, it was carved off from a farm. It has a barn on it, maybe a couple of sheds, or maybe it has some nice fencing, perhaps, some nice, nice land for growing crops or something. Well, you can buy a piece of land like that that does not have a house, but a lot of the other elements of homesteading are already there. So you can put a house there. You can bring a temporary house or a yurt, or you can bring a temporary place for a while and live on a piece of land, and then at the right moment, then you can build your house, you see. So there's an important thing to know what you want and have a strategy for what you're going to do as soon as you get it. Now, it's hard to find a piece of property that's exactly the match of your dream. You see, so you have to have a list of what I must have, what I would like to have, and what you definitely do not want. You definitely do not want a whole bunch of junk cars in the property right next to you, for example, or something like that. But you might want to be adjoined to another piece of forest. Like in this piece of land here, the land that these people were considering, and they chose not to buy it, but over off to the side of this piece of land was 20 acres of wild forest that nobody was going to build on, you see. So that provides a whole lot of insulation, and wildlife is hanging out in there and so on, but nobody's going to build there, so you got your privacy guaranteed pretty much. You see, when you buy a piece of land, think of those kind of things as well. Now, a homestead requires some maintenance. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can buy a house that's in perfect condition, and then you're going to develop the homestead on it. Well, that's a good thing. Don't buy a dilapidated house and a dilapidated land that you need to totally improve. One or the other has to have low maintenance, otherwise you'll get really stuck holding the bag. So if you're going to develop a homestead, try to get a house that doesn't need much, okay? You don't want to put a roof on and be doing septic things and driveway things in your brand new homestead when you want to be making the fencing and doing other things on the land that are more along the lines of your goals. So you're going to need some tools, some machines. Machines I recommend: a battery charger, an air compressor, a lawnmower. It's better to have like a lawn tractor, because you can do so many things with them. I just get used ones. I've owned lawn tractors for many years at various guys. I have an old John Deere that chugs along. I got it cheap. I know how to maintain it. It's got a 48-inch in deck, and I can put a trailer behind it, and I can carry things around. That's another thing you need. You want to be carrying stuff around your homestead, because if you're used to a backyard on a quarter-acre property and you suddenly get 10 acres, well, whoa, you might not even see part of that 10 acres for a couple of years unless you go out and explore it deliberately. So also that brings me up a point, is know the land that you have. When you buy the land, study it carefully, get the satellite maps, get the topo maps, see what's around you. When you look around the property like this, for example, in this case here, you see all that farmland around there, lots of woods and farmland. It's going to be a long time, but you won't be seeing any Walmarts coming in there anytime soon. You see, and there was a dead-end road as well. So basically this road right here was a dead end right up here. So you got all that area around here, and nobody's going to bother you. Build a nice home, relax, set up an estate. That's the kind of strategy you think about. Now here, this is information you can get online also from the GIS system. There's a topo map and outline. You can find out who owns the property all around you. That's how I found out that this piece of land right over there is all vacant, and there's no houses there. So you can see how when you strategize, you buy selectively. You want to get to a point where in 20 years you don't find a convenience store right next to your house. You see, you got to think about that. So let me go through my list here. there's going to be a lot of tasks that you have to do on your property. Let's say the mowing. I mean, I have a property that's 4 acres and it's got a little barn on it and a shed and an old log cottage and a small house. Now, part of the land is wooded. There's a stream down below, and I have to mow hilly about 1.5 acres. So I go up and down, and it's hilly every single bit. There's hardly any flat in my land here. So it's not super steep, but you got to think about that. This house that I looked at the other day, the house is nice, but boy, you know, that slope. And I noticed they had a big, huge tractor. They had a pretty good size lawn tractor with a heavy-duty deck on it to mow that sucker. You know, because you're going to go down a slope like this with a lawn tractor, go down and back up. Don't go on the side because, you know, some tractors will actually tip it. You know, you have to be pretty steep, but. So get your equipment, think about what you need. You don't have to buy like lots of things. When I got this property right here, I landed here about 7 years ago, I realized the grass in the backyard was up to my chest. It was like these kind of weeds, let's call them stick weeds, and I go, oh my goodness. So I bought a cheap lawn tractor. That was one of the first things I did. I bought a cheap lawn tractor and go in and start cutting it down. I went through about 3 or 4 drive belts to cut that all down, and once it was down, you know, after a while, for a while I used to mow the whole thing, and then I got to the point where it's okay, well, I don't need to mow the whole thing, leave some area for the turtles and the birds and the moles and all that stuff, and then mow parts of it. So it's kind of a compromise. You can decide what not to mow on your property, but you'll definitely need some tools. Another thing I recommend is a chainsaw. It's good to have a chainsaw. It's good to have a weed whacker. And you know, a charger. If you can charge your batteries, you need lawn equipment, your car now and then. Have an air compressor to pump up the tires, and have and run some tools, and have a charger that you can restore batteries and jump start and that sort of thing. So you want to have a task list of things you need to do regularly, like I was saying, mowing. But animals need feeding. I rented on a place years ago on a property that had 9 horses and 40 acres. And every single morning without fail, every single morning you got to go out and feed those horses. And every single evening you got to feed them. And then you got to let them out. There's all kinds of maintenance to do. And sometimes a horse will do stupid things and run into a beam and hurt themselves or something like that. And, you know, if you got animals, you're going to be caring for them like pets in a way. So you know, I suggest people don't get like a flock of sheep. If you want sheep, then get like maybe 2 or 2 mini goats to start with, and work your way up. Because in the countryside, there's a lot of wildlife. Where I live, I see bears. I've seen bears multiple times on my property and next door property, crossing the road. They're out there. So same with coyotes. The coyotes tend to hide, and they, you know, foxes are small and they have little things that they eat out in the woods, and they don't typically come onto your yard in the countryside. And another thing that you might want to consider right here when I'm thinking about important things to have in the countryside, think about, you know, at least a .22 rifle or something, because you might see a rabid animal or something of that nature. You know, a rabid animal, you got to put it out of its misery. It's going to die a horrible death, and it's dangerous. So that kind of thing, you definitely, and just utility target practicing. Most people in the country keep a few small guns or whatever, and for protection and so on. But, you know, rarely ever use them, but you have them, and just something to know about. Now, again, the strategy of the land is harvest the resources that are there. A lot of people own fantastic land. I've seen, you know, really beautiful houses, but then they got a beautiful forest behind them, and like they're doing nothing with it. It's just, so there's rocks, there's gravel, there's hardwoods, there's pine, there's cedar. Cedar makes all kinds of great fence posts that last a long time. You can harvest the resources on your own land and make it pay. That's not what suburban life is about. They just cut down all the trees, they plant some, you know, decorative shrubs or whatever, make it all look cool, and put some mulch on everything, and then they spray it all down so you don't have a single weed or whatever. And this is the way they do modern properties. But in the, you know, around the world, people think you're crazy. If you got land, you better start making some food with it or have some animals, because they ain't making no more land. I have a license plate that says buy land. So Think about that. They ain't making anymore. And another thing I was going to mention, definitely learn your property, make a map. Have a drawing of your property, okay? Make an expanded view copy. Go down to GIS and study your land carefully from the satellite pictures and just walk around it and see what's there. You might find maybe you'll find a 57 Chevy back in the woods. So, just kidding. But there's things on people's property that you don't know about. I was looking at a property some years ago, and they had a little stream that wasn't flowing constantly, but it did provide some water. So they have a slope down this way, and at the bottom there's a little stream. Down there we found out that there's a lot of just a fine silt, just a really beautiful clay. It just like it was all and sifted down over the years, and it's just really, really fine. So you got some clay, and then the water down there, even though the stream might not flow 24/7 or all year long, usually if it's in a ravine and there's water coming down there, it'll go down even further underground, and so that means you might be able to put in a spike well. A spike well is a small well that you can tap down up to 20, 25 feet at the max, and you just tap it down into the water down below. It has a little screen and filter on it, and you have a hand pump, or you can attach an electric pump, and you can pull water. So if you have a piece of property that has a ravine like that, like a stream that flows sometimes, there's a good chance that not too deep near the stream, not too deep below that, is an area where you can tap into some water. Now, when you build a well, in the countryside, most properties have a well, and if you have a well, the pump can go bad. Now and then it does, but they generally last a really, really long time. So, but if you buy a property that has a well on it, you want to know that it's not leaking and basically the water pressure is okay. So, once you have a well, you can take water to irrigate something, and you can divert. But sometimes you have to take it across quite a bit of distance on, say, 10 acres of land. So that maybe in another part of the property, you can't afford to build like one of these really expensive 300-foot wells, but you might be able to put in another type of small well if the layout of the land is right, you see. Now, also look for soil, and sunshine is an asset. So when you see a property, I looked at one time, it's all pine. You cannot make good soil from a forest where pine needles fell for years and years. It's just way too acidic, and you got to cut all those pine trees down. It's just a mess. You got to have some area on your land that, if you want to have a garden, it's got to have sun, and best to have sun all the day. That way you can grow all kinds of stuff. And then certain land shapes, pointing this way and that, you can have a little bit. A crop will grow on a slant. You can have a slight slant for a garden. There's no problem. And if you have a little dip in a property, like one I was looking at recently, if the water has a tendency to naturally flow down from the rain, and then you have a place in a property where you can maybe put a little bit of a bowl there, and then you can have a catch pond that isn't really big, but at least it will be enough that will feed some goats or whatever, and add some extra water to your property for washing and that sort of thing. And you can always get a battery-powered pump or something and pump water out of a little pond. So think of all the resources. I don't want to make these videos too long here. I'm not sure how long this one is right now, but I will try to wrap it up here. Just learn about country life. Meet your neighbors. If you're going to be on the... I have a beautiful neighbor who's got a bulldozer. If anything happened, I guess he could build a road or whatever, move a tree. But this is a dead-end road, and there's lots of people up on this road. One guy's got an orchard. There's a bunch of cattle. There's some horses around here. There's lots of deer running around. There's all kinds of rabbits and squirrels and birds. And there's a stream run down the valley. If you don't have to be on a stream necessarily, but if you're fairly near a stream, there's probably access to water well, because generally a stream's running downhill, and typically not too far from a stream you might also find a place where you can build a decent well, if you have to go that route. But there are assets on property that you might not consider including when I was saying the neighbors. If you have neighbors have equipment, you don't have to have like a big orchard. If your neighbor's got a big orchard and just tons of apples, you make a little deal, say, hey, can I pick a bunch of your apples? Because a lot of times if you see an old orchard and they're not really harvesting anymore. I mean, they just drop apples like crazy. There's one up the road from where I live. I mean, they're not even really harvesting it much. And all the deer come and everything, but if you go to someone like that and your neighbor and say, look, I see you have a pile of apples and the deer are eating, and do you mind if I have some? And offer to pay for them. So, the guy would probably say, hey, just go help yourself, go down and pick them up. But at least offer something, But anyway, I want to make this video pretty short, but there's important things to know when you buy a property and start a homestead. And start small, do little things. It's good to have a grand plan, and someday we're going to have all the cows and everything going on, but it takes a lot of responsibility, a lot of effort, a lot of knowledge, get your skills together. Develop some skills. You need them on a homestead. Even if you could just pound a hammer and make a saw, cut or something with a power tool, get some tools on your homestead and start looking into the part-time solar. There's a lot of small power stations. I recommend having not necessarily the whole really super expensive rooftop solar. That can, you can do that later, but at least if you get some modest system that'll back up, because in a real pinch, if you can power some lights and a few tools and charge your stuff, you're going to be fine. You don't necessarily need every, like your dryer, electric stove. In a real pinch, you don't need a full power electric system. You need some. And that's why I suggest people look into the smaller kind of ones that if they don't have the money to immediately just put in a whole solar thing on their land, then go around of getting some supplementary power, maybe put something on a shed and charge up some batteries and have something going on at all times, that in a real pinch, when the power goes out, then you have something. So thanks again for listening. I hope people will come and see a lot of my other videos about buying and selling land in Virginia and making a homestead. So my name is Paul, and I hope to see you in my other videos.